On Wednesday, I had to put down my golden retriever. Going into such a time of making very difficult decisions, the doctors were looking as hard as they could to find the signs of cancer they thought might be there. The x-rays showed nothing, ultrasounds, nothing. And even when they went into surgery to remove the mass that was on his spleen, they still did not see anything suspicious. And then his recovery began. The first day he was doing okay, but then he made a turn for the worse. And when it became clear was when he received a transfusion of blood, and yet the red blood cell counts continued to drop, and I knew. I had been in hospitals too much in my young life. And so before the doctor came in to have the conversation, I knew in my heart what the outcome of the day would be. But it would be a few hours later until we sat down and we talked. And she graciously shared the scenario, and I said that he is ready to die. And she assured me that you made the right decision, and I said, I know, without hesitation. Such surprises that we have in our life throw us off. And cancer comes in so many forms, but it's awfully cleverly disguised. It's hard to detect. It's usually under the surface where it cannot be seen, despite the best medical science that we have. It's hidden. It's beneath. It's out of sight. I recall my second summer while in seminary that I was working as a chaplain in the UNC hospital in Chapel Hill, a large teaching hospital much like MCV here in Richmond. And I spent several weeks on the oncology section of the hospital, an enormous building where this experienced oncology chaplain had seen it all the variations of this disease, all the ways that it had surprised people and had shaken families to their core time and time again. It was never the same story, but always something new, clever, and destructive this disease can be. And he shared with me that he had recently read a respectable medical journal that said all people have cancer cells in their bodies. But for most of us, they simply lay dormant our entire life. Unfortunately, some do become active, as we all know very well. But he shared that if we simply lived on forever, eventually they would become active and cancer would take our life. I've always thought about that comment. Things that are inside of us that can destroy us. Things that live beneath the surface. In our gospel today, Jesus is warned by the Pharisees to get out of here because Herod wants to kill you. But Jesus knows that Herod does not have the courage to kill him. For Jesus knows what lives inside all of us. It is not hidden from Jesus. It is not taken out of the sight of God's eye. Jesus knows that Herod is scared. Jesus knows that Herod would never be able to do it for his fear of other people. But Jesus says, you go and you tell that fox for me, the fox, a clever, destructive little animal that sneaks up on us, hides from us as it tries to destroy. And as Jesus stands there as that representation of the lion, up front, transparent, confident in the open to share who he is and how he will carry out God's work, the complete opposite of the fox. Our great shepherd says, "You can tell Herod that I have work to be done." For Jesus knows that not only Herod will not kill him, but he also knows that Pilate and the Pharisees and no one will actually kill him, because Jesus will die and will rise to new life and will live on. And this is the great promise to us, that no matter what destroys this secular life that we live in now, our life with God continues. A resurrection has been given to us in the promise of this lion that stands before these officials and says, "I am not afraid, and I will not be silent." So whether it's cancer or an accident or old age that ends our life, we remain alive with God. And that it is in that final act of our death in which the ultimate healing always takes place. So as we walk with people who are near the end, and we walk with our animals near the end, we know that it is not the end, but simply a transition. It allows us to embrace that power of the resurrection, and it allows us to be fully present, out in the open, with no disguises and no hiding from the emotions that stir within us. On Friday, I had to smile for a moment myself, thinking about everything that has gone on in my life and thinking about country songs. And that I was thankful that I didn't own a truck, because I would have lost my truck by now. You know the old joke, they say if you play a country song backwards, you get your wife back, and you get your dog back, and you get your truck back. So I was grateful that maybe it's over, this path that I have been on. When the doctor came in and we shared the news, and I said, "He's ready." Sitting in an ICU setting, much like a human ICU setting, with the same machines and the nurse's station in the middle and the same wonderful care. The only difference is the patients at the vet are lying on the floor and not in a bed. And so I crawled on the floor and I put his head in my arms like a hen gathers her brood. And our eyes locked as he took his last breath together. And then I wept. I wept like I have not wept since I was in high school. I wept with snot coming out of my nose and tears coming out of my eyes, and I was a mess. And I thought I had gotten it all out, and so I leave and go get in my car, and I start to weep again, unable to start to drive. And I was surprised, not by the sadness, not by my love, but the healing that I was feeling through allowing that emotion to come out from my heart. The feeling of knowing how much love is still in my heart. And the power of God helping me to work through the pain to the power of a resurrection type moment. feeling transformed there in the midst. What a blessing it is to love anyone, to love anything that much. And I'm very aware that it wasn't just tears for my dog in which I cried, but the willingness to allow it to come to the surface and to be vulnerable and to be in a sense of great humiliation in feeling God's presence there with me the whole time. For as Paul tells the Philippians today, it's easy for us to live in our gut, in our belly, where we have gut reactions. And then we quickly go with our heads to try to figure out what we need to do and how we need to say, but most of all, how we can disguise our emotions and our sadness beneath the surface so that no one sees us lose our cool. And yet Christ calls us to be citizens in heaven. I tell you, even with my tears, to this letter to the Philippians, Jesus will transform the body of our humiliation that it may be conformed to the body of his glory. Jesus brings us from those things much like cancer and much like a fox that like to live beneath the surface hidden, slowly being destructive and clever, and to bring it to the surface where the hen can gather us and comfort us and love us. We live in such a time where we bottle so much stuff up within our very beings. And I'm saddened that it's taken me this long in my life to remember the wonderful release of weeping. Not just once, but allowing it to happen as my body and my heart says I need to. And with that weeping, to go through the pain and to find the power of God standing there with me and realizing this. All those things that we bottle up inside of ourselves separate us from our trust in God. And if they separate us from our trust in God and the life of a resurrection, then they also separate us from other people. Bottling it up, trying to hide it and to put on our best face, instead of being a child of God. And feeling perfectly comfortable to be a mess before God and a mess before our neighbors when we need to be a mess, because in that mess is the trust that God will care for us. Covered in tears and covered in dog hair, that is exactly where I needed to be. And I'm so thankful that I allowed myself to go there. We're in this time of Lent, which is a time that some are uncomfortable as a church. We feel that it's a time where we should be shameful and feeling guilty. But I think that Lent is an opportunity for us to recognize what is festering in us, what cancer lives in us that is slowly tearing at our hearts. And how we can articulate, even if it's just one thing that weighs so heavy on our hearts that we try to keep from ourselves and from this world and from God, that if we turn to God and allow that connection to happen, that the healing can take place within us. And we allow it to come to the surface, where we're not living out of our gut or out of our head, but we're living out of the heart that God created us. Because even if there is truth that everyone has cancer cells that live within our bodies, it's also true that God's love lives within our hearts. It's always there, waiting to break through the darkness so that we can experience a light, which is a chance to experience a small resurrection, one opportunity at a time, when we allow it to come to the surface and take ownership of it, and not to feel ashamed, but to feel empowered by the God who created us, who loves us, who gathers us like a hen with her brood. Jesus says that there is work to be done. I'm going to be performing cures today and tomorrow. My brothers and sisters in Christ, we live in this tomorrow. Jesus is still performing cures in us. Jesus is a healer. And the healing always takes place within our hearts. And there's some parts of our hearts that when they are so broken that we will continue to have to heal with them time and time again, but we have to let it out. Bring it into our own view. Bring it into that sense of, God, I don't want to be separated from you anymore because of this. Help me to find my connection with you. Help me to see how much love is in my heart so that I can be healed. Because if it's hurting me, it's likely that it's hurting those around me as well. Lent calls us into sin. And if we understand that the very basic definition of sin is anything that separates us from God, then we have to seek what is bottled up inside of us that is separating us. And to seek one thing at a time so that we can learn to deal, that we can learn to accept healing. For if anyone understands pain any more than we can ever imagine, it's Jesus. For no one suffered greater pain than he did for us. And he did this for us so that we could know the way, that we could see the example of how much love that God has for all of us, and to take that pain on. For we pass our pain on to Christ and we say, help me to work with it. And that pain eventually moves to power where we can feel a transformation taking place in our bodies. And we can feel the love of God filling us up and helping us to be the light of Christ in this world. This is why we go through these 40 days, not so that we can be sad and to feel sorry and to feel guiltful, so that when Easter comes, we can really celebrate the resurrection. We can rise with Christ in a new day, anticipating that glorious resurrection that will come when we are done with our earthly journey and ready to be fully with our God. Amen.